All right, if you just give me a minute, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Martin. He's president and CEO of the Southeastern Institute of Research, or SRI. This is a company based out of Richmond, Virginia. It's a 50-year-old marketing research company. He has conducted over 14,000 research studies, helping companies, organizations, and communities identify their unique selling propositions and formulate strategies. He is currently, or his firm is currently helping organizations, cities, counties to understand the power of deliberate placemaking efforts as the key to a community's future economic development efforts. Last month at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, he spoke and he talked about how we can, as a community in Hampton Roads, look at state and regional challenges and how we can better plan for the future. I thought his outlook on things was very interesting and unique, so I thought it would be a great topic to bring here tonight, because as we all look towards the future, I thought this would be another tool that we would have in our toolbox, so to speak, to look at things. So without further ado, Mr. Martin, I'd like to bring you forward, and sir, if you would give us your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and good evening to everyone. The one word that you kept hearing over and over again was future, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I know that you guys spend a whole lot of time making important decisions, planning for and governing this county. I really want us to sit back and say, what's it going to be like 20, 30 years from now? And that's what I want to share with you tonight. I want to take you into the future. And you heard I sort of come by this honestly. We do a lot of studies, focus groups and ethnography and research surveys, and we get to work for a lot of big people. I'm on airplanes a whole lot. I don't get the beautiful drive I had tonight from Richmond, but I'm flying around helping a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and also get to work with a lot of folks in the Hampton Roads region. And I also have I live in a zip code in Hampton, in Norfolk, as well as Richmond. So I call a lot of places home. You guys saw me at the TPO meeting because we do a lot of work in transportation. We work for, do a lot of studies for VDOT and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation and some transit systems here and across Virginia and around the country. So transportation really embraces a lot of long-term planning, and that's where we really come in and try to help our clients like that. We do a lot of trends research to really find a place that we can share our research insights with our clients. We like to make context for every study that we do. You know, if you do one study about where consumers are headed, it's best to understand that in the context of major trends that are going on in society. So what we do is connect the dots. We try to understand demographic trends, societal and cultural trends, and that points the way to the future. But there's one other lens that we use and have really perfected over the years, and that's understanding the change agents. Because, I mean, the future is all about people and where people are headed and what people want and what people believe. And so we try to understand those change agents by using what we call a generational lens, understanding different generations. So this is an important slide that I have up here, and I need you to identify your generation. The greatest generation, 1909 to 1928, silent generation, 1929 to 1945. Baby boomers, 1946 to 64, then Gen Xers, 1965 to 1982, and then millennials. Millennials, 1983 to 01. And the very youngest generation hasn't been named yet. Some people might call them Gen Z, I've heard, but you don't really name a generation until they really get some traction and you kind of figure out who they are. So I'm going to share with you tonight insights and understanding things through a generational lens. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour and make you a generational expert, so then we can talk about the future with that lens together. Because what we see, in a nutshell, what we see in the future through this generational lens is they're going to be regions and cities and even counties that are going to be winners and losers. And it's going to be that black and white based on what people do now, based on how people start planning for the future now. And my hope is after the next 30 minutes or so, as I take you through this research and give you this new appreciation for generations, that you'll have a new understanding of the future. I'm just going to say from the onset, this is not the only way to look at the future, but it's the way that we have chosen and the way that we study the future for not only cities and counties, but also for Fortune 500 packaged goods products and services, trying to figure out where a company should go. I do want to do one disclaimer. You saw that slide of all the places, all the accounts or clients that we work for, VDOT and Hampton Roads Transit and some counties and cities across Virginia. I was just in Rockbridge County yesterday working with them. And this presentation is from my firm. This is not representing any body of work from our clients. This is my firm's thinking and direction. So I have to say that in order to keep my clients. They don't think I'm going off the reservation. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about major shifts ahead, major trends that we see really coming across America, implications for Isle of Wight, and understanding the change agents, get into generations, and I'm going to take you through just sort of the 101 on understanding the different generations that make up the population here. And then some suggested ideas for you. I don't know a whole lot, but I did spend some time looking at some of the numbers and looked at your website, and I drove through your beautiful county. I came up from the south from 460, and so I do have some opinions that I'll share with you. So let's get started. Major shifts ahead. Well, we see 10 fundamental shifts that are taking place that really are transforming America. I'm going to take you through, I think, 3 that I think are apropos to your planning as you guys look out for the next 2 or 3 decades. The first one is what's happening to our jobs. We're going through what we call as a creative job shift. When you got your computers 20 years ago, they had that little sticker on it that said Intel inside, and then it said Intel 1 and Intel 2, and basically what that was is a manifestation of something called Moore's Law, that about every 2 years, every 1.8 years actually, the capacity, the computing power of computers doubles because we get more transistors on those little chips, and that's called Moore's Law. A guy named Moore invented this. And so the understanding just how incredibly complex and powerful computers are, and even our iPhones and even our smartphones, right? If you think about that and put it into the context of big data that's arrived, where we're now putting all of our data up in the clouds and these smarter and smarter computers, when you think about all this, what we see happening in the future to jobs is that routine jobs are going to go away. The jobs that manage the routine are going to move away and push people down to manual jobs, and some of the lucky ones to the cognitive jobs, the jobs that manage the exception, because computers aren't very good when it gets off of that logic tree. So, and there was a really wonderful piece on National Public Radio about 2 weeks ago that really talked about this sort of the cognitive jobs of the future. And they ended with a really funny metaphor. They said, well, if your job is really messy, then chances are it's not going to get replaced by a computer if you have to deal with something that really requires constant change every day. So thinking about this, when you think about the routine jobs, think about telephone operators or word processors and typists. When I first started working, there was a word processing pool, right? Travel agents. Now we all book our own travel. Even bookkeepers. So here's the most sophisticated library in North Carolina. It's at NC State. And there's the librarian on the left. But wait, now the librarian is the stacks. It's actually computers that have robots that go through and get the book for you and bring it down to checkout. And so the librarians are losing their jobs, or now they're shifting to something different. So the jobs of the future, the routine jobs, are going to really be pushed down to manual labor and causing some downward compression on pricing on the hourly rate. But also think about the jobs that manage the exception. And so when we think about communities and who's going to attract those jobs, we go back to a really big thinker that came out about 20 years ago, Richard Florida. And he wrote a book called The Creative Class, and it was quite a sensation, and he's still around doing a lot of work talking about how communities have to make themselves attractive to the community, to the creative class. And the way he defined creative class, he said people that work in these industries, which is about 30% of the workforce, this is the creative class. And, we think a lot of Richard Florida, but we have a slightly different perspective on his work. We think that everybody, in every industry has creative people. Every industry has creative people. And what you want to understand is, does your community have creative people? Because that's really who's going to manage the exception. That's who's going to have those cognitive jobs of the future. So we do research in cities, and we ask the workforce in cities these 3 questions, in addition to a lot of others, but We ask people, is creativity part of your job requirement? Are you involved with creation? Do you have, in terms of your work contribution, do you say it's creative? And we can put a city's workforce on a creative continuum from low to high. And in doing that, and here's Denver, for instance, and this is looking just at the young people in Denver, we can see that a third, 31%, are at the high end of this creative continuum, the way they answered those questions. And it's interesting, if you look at this, you can compare one city to another, like Atlanta. Well, Atlanta doesn't have as many sort of self-anointed, self-described creative people as Denver. And I'll tell you why real fast, that Denver is a hot spot for attracting young creative people right now. So we have creative continuum scores across a lot of major U.S. cities, and we see a top tier and a second tier. Well, what's the value of having creative people, in this case, creative young people in your community? What's the value of that? Well, we call it a creative dividend. Your community gets a creative dividend. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why it's important. If you have people on the high end, they are so much more likely to start a business or a nonprofit startup, that these guys are sort of the entrepreneurs. They also feel like they can make a difference in a community by 2-to-1 score over people that are on the lower or medium end of this continuum. They plan to purchase a home, which you want everybody to do, to put down roots, right? And pay taxes through that. They have a high referral rate. They're the guys much more likely to tell other people, come here, this is a great place. This is a wonderful place. And they plan to stay for the next 5 to 10 years, and they plan to retire here. So you want that creative edge. You want people on that creative continuum, because they're your ambassadors. They're the people investing in your place. All right, so that's shift number one, the future sort of job shift. Shift number two is one that I will say no one can argue with, because it is a fait accompli the way things are working, and that's population. So here we are, the U.S. population today, 320 million adults. 320 million adults. And I'm going to make some of these slides available to you guys after this. 320 million, and if you look out, U.S. Census says we're going to go to 358 million by 2030. Well, where is that growth going to take place? Well, if you look at the past 10 years, it's a real good prologue to the future. So the darker the colors on this map is where the greatest population growth has taken place. And so when we look out in the future, and we look at Virginia, that population of America going from 320 to 358, Virginia is going to go from about 8 million today to over 10 million by 2030. And 80% of the growth in Virginia is going to take place in this golden crescent, which demographers have been talking about 30 years. I mean, I'm old. I mean, I've been doing this marketing stuff for 35 years, and right when I started in it, and even in college and graduate school, I was hearing people talk about this golden crescent. And it's now, and I go to DC a lot to work in the Northern Virginia market. When I come back, I see people on 95 backed up, waiting just to get off the exit into Fredericksburg, into those counties. So 80% of this growth is going to be from the Northern Virginia sector, really starts at Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia, Richmond, over to Hampton Roads. That's where the growth is going to happen. So looking at this and reading a little bit tighter, there are tons of demographic numbers you can get for population growth from Weldon Cooper or the Virginia Employment Commission, U.S. Census, and they all have slightly different ways they project. And so I don't really want to get into the different aspects of those projections, other than to say Hampton Roads is slated to grow. There's just, by every way you look at it, everybody's numbers that you look at, it's going to go from 1.7 million to over 2 million by 2040. And so looking at your numbers, and here we just used the 2013 estimate from the U.S. Census and then Weldon Cooper numbers looking out forward, you guys are slated to grow. There's no question. You guys are slated to grow, and you guys have seen it over the last decade or two. You've seen growth come this way. And then just think about the composition of that growth. When we look and break it down by people 65 plus, we see a doubling of your senior population, which you're going to learn in a minute is very typical on what's happening across America for you guys to becoming older. What we also see is something that's alarming, in that your younger group, your 15 to 34, isn't slated to grow when you look at this demographic analysis. And so that's alarming, because in the future, there are going to be fewer and fewer, relatively fewer and fewer younger people overall. So you're going to see cities fighting and fighting more and more to be a young person's hub. And so that takes me to shift number 3. We call it the age shift. One of our friends was the first to really talk about this, Ken Dykewell, and he called it the age wave and wrote a book about it 20 years ago. And it's really coming true. It's demographic destiny. And so I want to take you through what's behind this force. Ever since the dawn of man, ever since mankind arrived on the planet, there's always been more younger people alive than older people. It's just always the way it's been. Now 2 things have conspired to change this. And it's happening right before our eyes. And it's one of those things that it comes slowly, then suddenly, kind of like Hemingway talked about. This is what's happening to this trend. Life expectancy, because of the miraculous gains in healthcare and health sciences and inoculations and all that, we're living a whole lot longer. So over the last 115 years, we've gone from 47-year life expectancy to 80. So consequently, we have all these generations alive all at one time. All of these generations. And it's a good thing, right? I'm going to enjoy those bonus years. But now file that away. So we got the life expectancy almost doubling. At the same time, we have this shifting birth rate, a shifting birth rate. So who was here alive in the 1930s? Alive in the 1930s, a couple of people, right? Well, the 1930s, it was a baby bust, because it was a very dark time. I mean, unemployment was 25%. People had to line up at soup kitchens. Families moved in together. It was a tough time to survive. And the New Deal started, but that took a while. It just didn't work right away. And we didn't have all of those levers to pull on the economy. So what happened when these folks went home at night? Well, they didn't feel like making babies. So there was a baby dearth. And you know, it actually happened to us during this Great Recession. We actually saw our birth rate dip below the replacement rate in America, because during those first couple of years, remember how uncertain it was in the banking industry? And so the same thing happened. Then in World War II, what happened? Well, we won. And we got real happy, right? And there was a baby boom, huge baby boom in America. And that's why we're called baby boomers, because of the baby boom. And then in the late 50s, early 60s, birth control got legalized, and 2 people in the household working, right? Women entered the workforce. And so another baby dearth. So the Gen X population's a lot smaller. In fact, someone in Washington at this time, I need to have those come at certain points, right? So I think I left my email on. Someone in Washington saw that we weren't giving out so many Social Security cards, and birth cards, and they just said, oh my gosh, we're having a problem here. And they studied it and went, we're not going to have a future workforce to really run our economy. We've got to let in more people. Immigration knob got turned on a lot more. And so this Gen X population, yes, born here was only a much smaller group, but the actual numbers that are in this age group now are 75 million. And now we're just replacing ourselves with a 2.1 birth rate, right? And so all of our growth in America, it's immigration. I mean, we really are bringing people in. And there, I'll just give you one little political sidebar. All this idea about controlling immigration is about, we're going to control the future growth of America. So immigration, you can't lose that argument in the middle of who can have citizenship or not. We've got to remember that immigration is good, because over in China right now, and Japan and other countries, they're getting old and they're sort of xenophobic, and they got other problems to deal with if they can't grow through immigration. So all of this birth rate, this curve shows you what has happened, this shifting birth rate. So back to this population pyramid, it's no longer a pyramid. It's shifting shape because of these 2 forces. So here we are in 1960 looking like, and it's men on the left, women on the right, who's alive at these age segments. And let's go forward from 1960, going to 1980, 1990, 2000. Now here we are at 2010, 2020, and let's go out in the future. And so basically what you're seeing is our pyramid is shifting shape to a rectangle. So you can't think about the population pyramid anymore. That's a relic. You got to think about the population, the population empire state building. So I'm going to take a temporary minute and figure out what happened here. It's funny. So this population pyramid shifting shape is right here. Yay. We've got 1 screen, 2 screens, 3 screens, 4 screens. All right. So if we think about the 65 plus population, we're going from 38 million today, what you would call seniors, 65 plus. In America, we're going to 72 million by 2030. That U.S. population, the makeup of seniors in our population is going from roughly 10% to 20%. And the same thing's going to happen in Virginia. We're going to roughly go from 10% to 20%, so you can remember these numbers. Now, what state do we kind of poke fun at to say, yeah, we send all the seniors there? Florida. Well, today, Florida is 20% senior. Today, Florida is 20% senior. They're going to go to 30%. So this changing ratio is taking place. It used to be in 1960, 4 people under the age of 18 to every 1 over 65. And so, boy, didn't Social Security make sense? A lot of young workers, few older people, right? Well, here we are today, about 2 people under the age of 18 to every 1 over 65. And then in the future, we're going to go to 1 to 1. 1 person under 18 to every 1 person over 65. That's that shift. I could go on and on about what's going to happen to Social Security, but that's not why you guys asked me to come here. And if you want more proof of this, with sort of tongue-in-cheek, there's a diverging trend on the sale of adult incontinence products now exceeding the sale of baby diapers. But what this does, I don't make this stuff up. I mean, but what this means for the future, and I want you all to keep thinking now out 20 years. What this does for the future is there going to be relatively fewer younger people and relatively more older people. And it's going to have an impact on our workforce. It's going to impact our workforce. And so here's some Department of Labor statistics saying, all right, well, we've got 154 million, 159 million workers today. We're going to go to 163 million by 2022. That 20 to 54 group, which is the sweet spot, right, of the age group of workers, is going to go from 101 million to 103 million. Kind of hardly any growth, right? And let's look at that older group. Wow, that's really going to take off. It's going to grow by 28%. America's workforce is going to get a lot older. But let's look at the younger group. 16 to 24 is actually going to decline. It's actually going to decline. And so this really does change everything. It really changes everything. It has implications for every city and every county and every really state across America. And so that Hampton Roads PDC number, you know, I showed you this before, and how the older adults are going to grow, and then how we're going to have a pretty much flat growth for the younger people. And then we did those numbers for Isle of Wight, and we said, okay, yep, you're going to basically double your seniors. And what's going to happen to your youth? Well, it's basically going to be flat. And so this is something that I want you to keep in mind, because the goal for regions now is how to become a hub for creative older workers, but also really a hub for creative younger workers. Because if you're not intentional, if you're not thinking about what am I going to do to attract young people, you got to recognize that there are other cities and counties that are doing it. And I know it because they hire me to help them. There are plenty of people like me that write books about this, and it's becoming, this topic is now becoming mainstream. Because what will happen in the future is you're going to find hubs of young people. You're going to find cities and counties that are known for having a lot of young people. And young people like to be with young people. And I'm going to share with you why in just a minute. And it's really, that idea is getting on steroids at this point in time. So this word is getting out. More and more people are writing about this workforce crisis, shock of gray, the coming jobs war. And a lot of reports and studies are coming out about this. And you might hear about it in terms of placemaking, that cities and towns and counties are investing in placemaking. And it's in part because of this. So we believe there's going to be a coming battle for a creative workforce. And we're seeing companies now make announcements and specifically say, the reason we picked this location is because of its young people. the reason we picked this location. I can tell you, New Belgium's a big brewery, and they picked their first East Coast location. They picked Asheville, and they said they picked it because they could go in there and rehab an old warehouse that was sort of a greenfield, environmental waste area, but it was right on the river, and they could clean it up day one and have all people, young people, want to bike to work and work in their factory making beer. And so we've heard this from Marriott. Just about a month ago, Marriott announced that it was going to move 10,000 workers from Bethesda, which is not really a rural county, but just a suburban D.C. county. We're going to move 10,000 workers. We want to move closer to the metro system because our young people are telling us that, and the people who are leaving are going to work for companies at closer to transit. Even in Charlottesville, on Pantops, y'all know where 250 comes off of 64? That's a high area that overlooks Charlottesville. There's been 2 big companies that have left there and gone and moved downtown on the mall and moved hundreds of workers because that's where the young people wanted to be. So I am seeing this everywhere. And in fact, what is happening is we're seeing a shift in the economic development model. And the old model, which is up on the screen, is that you would put your list together of those huge companies you want to go after. You'd hire a real sophisticated, thoughtful person that looked nice and could put the facts together, and they would get on the road and knock on doors and try to sell your location and say, come here. And then when those big companies came, people would come, you would be able to create a great place, and the community grows together. That's how it used to be. You still have to go knock on doors. You still have to do the blocking and tackling of economic development. But we're seeing the model evolve to where you've got to invest in place and create a great place that attracts people first. Because so many people telework now, over a third of workers are doing that. So you've got to build this hot place where people are there because that's the workforce that companies are looking for. And so they want to come and be able to attract people day one by locating right where the workforce is. And you do that, then your community grows. So this model is being adopted by Portland and Denver and Austin, Texas, and we're seeing it with regional plans that people are talking about. I'm building place so I can have an attractive workforce because people are attracted to place. So that takes me to the next section, which is trying to understand why this trend is happening. Why is place so important? And that's where I want to share with you the deep-seated generational wiring that we study. How are people wired to think about where they live? And so we're going to do that idea of connecting all these trends with this generational lens. So what's a generation? And I'm not talking about just your dad versus you, but I'm really talking about these generational cohorts that span 15 to 20 years that we went over, those silent generation, the baby boomers. If you by chance were born on the edge of a generation, like I was born in 1959, and so yes, I'm a boomer, but I'm right on the edge of being a boomer. I'm called a cusper. It means I can appreciate older people and younger people at the same time and have a good time at parties talking to both. Big bookends create generations. Think about the silent generation, the stock market crashing in '29 and that horrific period in the 1930s economically, and then World War II breaking out. So those were 2 big changes in our society. So those were the 2 big bookends that created the silent generation term. So I'm going to take you through each one of these and show you how they're shaped by the events that transpired during their wonder years. So silent generation, remember these years, and I want you to think about someone. If you're not in the silent generation, I want you to picture in your head a relative that you may have that's in the silent generation. And then baby boomers, and I see a lot of fellow boomers around. And then Gen Xers. So Gen Xers are a lot of the people that are getting things done all around us, 33 to age 50. And then millennials. Now these are the rare exotic animals, the young people, right? This is the age 14 to 32, and they're called a lot of things. And I know I'm in a public meeting. But these are all the different terms that I've seen for millennials. And the biggest one that you might hear is Gen Y, Gen Ys. That's one and the same. Gen Ys and millennials are exactly the same. And as a researcher, people always say, well, John, where did Gen Y come from? I don't know. But I found a funny cartoon that I'm going to say that's where it came from. So here it is. So, understanding generations, I want you to remember this, for you boomers in the room. Do you remember Wonder Bread? Wonder Bread builds strong bodies 12 ways. I don't know if it tasted that great, but it was certainly an icon. And I have it here because I want you to remember this word wonder. You remember Fred Savage and the Wonder Years, the TV show? And it was about him as an adult looking back on what it was like when he was young, because events were washing over him and shaping values that he had as a young person. And that's what happens to us generationally. As a cohort, all of us boomers the same age, when we were in our wonder years, when we were wide-eyed and we went through events, they washed over us without any filters of being an adult, and they shaped in us some deep-seated beliefs and values that we share that are different than the other generations. And so I want to take you through this, and I want you to think about the wonder years that were going on when the silent generation was coming of age in the 1930s, right? That's when they were 5 to 15 years old. And these are some of the things that were happening. And I talked about the soup kitchens and bread lines and the New Deal. And the New Deal took 10 years to work. And the world was still sort of an awesome place. We hadn't flown across the ocean yet until Lindbergh did it. And so think about all those defining events, even at the kitchen table, parents talking about how difficult it was and just how to survive. So those values that got shaped in the silent generation were dedication and sacrifice, hard work, patience, respect for authority, duty before pleasure, honor. That's how you think about the silent generation. So in a nutshell, their archetype, they're dedicated, loyal, practical, dependable. That's the silent generation. And you know why they're called silent? It's because they didn't have a lot in the 30s, or their family didn't. And so they are just kind of a silent group. They're really thankful that they've got whatever they have now, right? So the nursing homes have had a field day, right? The lunch can show up late, and they're going to get, golly, thank you, I've got lunch, right? Well, stay tuned with boomers. It's going to be a lot different. But the silent generation, the term is actually flattering. I think these guys have really done a whole lot to build America and sacrificed a whole lot. So in a word to remember these guys by, and write this down, because I think there are going to be 4 words that make a lot of sense to you when I finish. They're selfless, right? They're not putting themselves before others, selfless. All right, now let's go to baby boomers. And I think a lot of us are experts on baby boomers. So what were the shared experiences that were going on when baby boomers were coming of age? Well, Dr. Spock arrived not from another planet, but from med school, and he taught people parenting, a new parenting style. Let's let the child be seen and heard. Take care of their health, but also their ego. Really raise a child to, to really be heard. And now think about, there are 4 kids at the table. In the silent generation, there was only 2 kids at the kitchen table. So the kids were fighting over, I want the biggest piece, and then TV arrived. And at first, it was just like 5 shows on, and they were all positive. They were all about what you can be. And then the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts took off. Our economy was doing so much better after World War II, and our parents and the suburbs were growing, and it all seemed like it was just always going to get better, and possibilities. And then the space race, and we were behind at first. And then our president said, we're going to the moon. And damned if we didn't, right? And I remember as a little kid, my parents taking me in a Galaxy 500, racing down to watch that blast off at Cape Canaveral, those Saturn rockets, and then we'd turn around and come home and watch them walking on the moon. So to me, I thought whatever we set our mind to, we could do. One thing we didn't do is we never stopped at south of the border for fireworks, but that's a whole other thing. But then the Watergate and Vietnam, we might not have led those revolts, but we certainly were the foot soldiers. So when you think about all the things that were going on in our wonder years, when we were 5 to 15, all of these things that were happening, it created values in us of sort of a personal gratification, a sense of entitlement. The world fell over in America. They were catering to us. Oh my God, this huge baby boom. We can sell them this, we can do that. We invented the 60-hour work week. Shame on us, but we actually did it on our watch. Boomers live to work. When you go to a party, that's the first thing you say to another boomer, what do you do for a living, right? That's not what our young people are saying to each other. And we say no to the status quo. We're change agents. We're profoundly optimistic. So in a nutshell, we're driven, transformational, and self-centered. Self-centered, I want you to write down for boomers. So a whole different way of thinking. Compare this to what you just heard about the silent generation, right? And when you see boomers spelled, B-O-O-M-E-R. M-E. There's a me in boomers, right? So let's think about the future of communities for aging boomers. And remember I talked about boomers being transformational? So think about all the things that have changed when on Air Watch, as we were the leaders, officials that run towns and cities and run courts and run businesses. We have really transformed America. And we think there's one last thing for us to do in a big way, and that's to transform growing older, right? What it's going to be like to grow older in America. We're not the silent generation. We're the vocal generation. So here's the typical life curve that you think about as you go through life. You sort of get better at your job. You kind of reach your peak at 50, and then you sort of slide down and your health fails and things get worse, and then you check out. Well, boomers, when we look at this, we're redefining the life curve. This is what we think it is. You do really well. You get to your peak, you stay there, you say goodbye to your friends, you catch a cold, and you die, right? So that's really kind of, you know, we're seeing it differently. Age is a state of mind. It's not a number. It's not a number. And so think about the silent generation. If you talk to people who are 85, they'll tell you, I didn't think I was going to live this long, because their parents died at 65, 67. And so this longevity revolution that I talked about, those bonus years, they're getting it and saying, oh my God, I would have worked longer. I would have saved more. I didn't know this was going to be like this. So the Sun City model at 65 made sense. Yeah, I'm going to retire at 65. Our culture really promoted that, and then I'm going to go to a retirement community. Boomers are now redefining growing older, and we're saying, you know what? I'm taking care of my parents. I realize with any luck, I'm going to be 85. And so that longevity bonus, we're starting to enjoy it now. And if you talk to most people my age, 50, 56, 60 years old, we're saying, you know what? We're not leaving our community. We're going to age in place. And that's a term now that's used in a lot of planning communities or organizations. Yeah, we're not maybe going to live in our huge house, and we're going to downsize to something smaller, but that's the idea. We're going to age in place. And we're going to try to figure out other things, maybe start businesses, start a second career, and articles are starting to talk about that. But there's one thing that we've got to realize, having twice as many seniors are going to bring a lot of implications to communities and cities. Right now, when you're driving home tonight, about 1 in 7 people are over the age of 65 in terms of drivers, and in the future, it's going to be 1 in 4. 1 in 4. So ton of senior drivers on the way. Well, the truth about growing older, and this is Barbie, if you've lost her, but this is what she looks like now. The truth about growing older is the warranty really runs out. And so I work with VDOT and do a lot of work with transportation companies. So we're thinking of ways to really help people be able to see better. My favorite is this one. Hey, you're on 95, which is kind of important. But that's why Google's coming out in part for driverless cars. I mean, it really makes sense. But what we see when we talk to boomers about what they want to do with their community, we see them say, I want to stay here and be part of this. This is my legacy. Maybe not in that big house, but I want a more car-light lifestyle. I want what people call a 15-minute community. I want to be able to get everything that I need right around my community and not have to drive long, long distances. And so I'm not just talking about downtown areas, I'm talking about activity centers. And this is a map that shows Richmond, our whole metropolitan region. And we have some low density and high density areas, but these marks, the numbers are super high density areas. And that's what our plans are trying to push people towards. So remember this idea, this sort of 15-minute community. All right, now we're going to go to millennials. I'm not going to spend time tonight on Gen Xers. And it's not because they're not important. It's just that they're going to be in the same place for the next 20 years. They got to keep working, and we're really focused on the change agents, people that are coming and going. So millennials are coming, and boomers are going. So let's think about what was happening to millennials during their wonder years, which are still going on right now, the wonder years for half of the millennials. They're still in middle school and high school. Well, boy, this image shows you a lot of kind of scary things that are going on in our society. And these are the defining events. Internet chat, school violence, this sort of new style of parenting. Boy, multiculturalism, a diversity in our society has really shot up. The wars, the recession, the Great Recession, technology. So what we see when we really study millennials and pull the onion back and try to understand what are your values, We see this uber confidence that our young people have. We see them oriented towards a civic duty, a certain amount of zest for achievement. They're hyper-connected, they're multitaskers, and they're fearless. They feel like they can walk through walls. When I hire a millennial, it's not the end of the first day where they don't come to me and say, John, I've got some ideas to change the company, right? It's just amazing. So what we think is they're ambitious, codependent, and purposeful. And what we really, and I'm going to define these terms for you because a couple of them are really loaded. What we really have come to realize is that for the first time, the defining events outside, these historical events that have washed over other generations to shape them, we're not seeing that happen on the same scale. We feel like this group has been insulated and some Teflon has been applied. And there are two factors that have really shaped who they are more than anything. It's how they were raised and how they're wired. How they're raised and how they're wired. So I'm going to take you through how they're raised quickly. Back to that overarching chart, the defining events. We have a new style of parenting now, right? There's a new style of parenting, and there are even books out about this. 67% of millennials, 2/3 are born to boomers, those transformational people born to that are saying, I'm going to do parenting right. I'm going to read this book, What to Expect When Expecting, How to Raise a Toddler. And then we bring them home and put cameras on the bed, right? We're going to watch every move. And then we tell them, and I'm talking about how we parent now, and I'm just as guilty, but we say to them from day one, you're special, right? You're special. From day one, right? And then we involve them in things like punishment. Hey, do you want a timeout? Right? It's just a lot different. So they're really, what we say is they're mentor dependent. They're dependent on their parents, and their parents have taken away swing sets so they don't get hurt. It's just amazing, this new generation. And in our research, we find out that the #1 influence on what the college they pick, what their major is, what their first job is parents, parents, parents. 82% have talked to their parents yesterday. And I put talked in quotes because texting with parents, right? And we've raised these all-stars. We've raised people that really feel like they have the capacity to make major changes. The second force that's gone on to sort of protect millennials from this much more dangerous world is how they're wired. So most millennials are usually, when you look at them, are on their phones texting one another. In fact, I caught these people texting each other and took this picture. But what it's done is it's created this new sense of self. It's created a codependency that this group has on each other. So I'm going to tell you this, explain this by way of a story. This is my daughter, Becca. She just graduated from college, on budget, on time, which I'm thrilled about. But this was her senior year in high school 5 years ago. And I woke her up early in the morning, and I had the John boat all hitched up. And I said, Becca, come fishing with me. Because the shad were running in Richmond. And when the shad run, if anybody here fishes, you catch fish where the fish are. So the shad were running. We got out there at 5 a.m., nobody else out there. And we put our line in. We caught a fish each. Second time, caught a fish each. She said, Dad, take a picture of me. And she gave me her cell phone. I clicked a picture, saying, I don't know why I'm slowing down. I kept fishing, and she didn't start fishing again. She just played with her phone. And so I ended up catching 90 fish because I kept calling them out. Number 78, trying to get her back in the game. And on the way home, I said, I really love that you skipped school to do this with me. I'm never going to forget this. And I said, but I got to ask you, why did you stop fishing? It's never been better as a top 10 experience for me in fishing. And she said, what do you mean? I said, Becca, I caught 90 fish. You caught 2. And she said, you don't get it, Dad. I'm like, well, yeah, that's another thing I don't get. Tell me, what did I do wrong? She said, I was fishing with 90 of my friends. And that's where I went, I got it as a research guy. I said, boomers, we live the experience. We're in that moment, right? I'm not about to share it with anybody. I'm catching 90 fish. But millennials can't have an experience unless they're sharing it. They got to share the experience. So our society has created this new collective hive. It's a new sense of self. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just new. So you can't have a bunch of people come in here and volunteer for the summer that are young, and the first thing you do is go, okay, you're going to go over to that building and work, and you're going to go over here. They're gone by noon. You got to say, all right, what are we all going to do together? So file that away, and then I'm going to leave you with 2 other ideas on millennials and then get into the implications for community. A lot of schools now, you have to do your report card. You can't get it unless you volunteered. you know, that we really have pushed our young people to volunteer more and more, so they have this sense of civic duty and sense of purpose. This was a study we did on what do you want your employer to be like, and millennials are leading the way and saying, I want my employer to do good, make money, but do something good for the community. So think about the Super Bowl. This past Super Bowl, half the TV spots were all about what the company is doing good, right? Not what they really make. And then the last thing about millennials is they are really ambitious. They feel like they've been groomed for something really special to create maybe a better future. And we think their ambition actually is going to come in really handy. One of our clients is AARP, and they did a fun contest to ask different generations to submit videos that capture the essence of their generation. And this one did extremely well for millennials. Let's see if this technology works.
I am part of a lost generation, and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own making. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. Experts tell me this is a quick fix society, but this will not be true in my era. Families stayed together once upon a time. I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.
So when we think about one word that wraps up millennials, it's really all about the collective self, right? And I'm going to say something just for shock value, okay? So you don't run around and say, John Martin said this. I just want you to remember this. The way we have parented these guys, when they heard you're special, they didn't hear it that I'm special. They didn't take it individually. What they heard was, you're special, and you're special, and you're special. They heard we're all special. In this collective self and working and subjugating the self for the collective, what they heard is that we all have value. So what we really have raised here is more socialistic-like people than capitalistic-like people. And it's the way they want to operate and share everything, it is just phenomenal. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just telling you that's what we've done with this young people. So the future of community is all about a new expression of community, a new expression of what we call hyper community. So in our research, we found 88% of people, young people, want to be in activity centers. I'm not going to say downtowns. That's not the idea. But they want to be in higher density areas, the young people. And we talk about what are you going to do when you grow up? They're saying they don't want the cul-de-sac big houses. They want to have opportunities to live and thrive in smaller homes, but in higher density areas. So I've just got to make sure you remember that, the activity centers. So this idea of a new shared space, all across America, these small apartments are the rage. In big public spaces are what people want. Big public spaces where they can communicate and share and play and laugh and have fun. This is inside a train station in Denver, and it looks like a big, fraternity house almost. This whole idea of sharing, a lot of young people today, if they're leaving town for the weekend, they put their apartments up for rent on a site called Airbnb. To total strangers, they leave their door unlocked, and they get to make $100. And the same thing in bit larger cities, bike sharing and car sharing is just really taken off. And in food trucks galore, because it's all about sharing. What we're also seeing is that they're just much less car-centric. And so we're working with DMV right now and helping them with a strategic plan and planning process. And the number of people getting driver's license, the percent of 16-year-olds has just fallen precipitously. And then 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, it's just not a rite of passage anymore. And so consequently, buying new cars is falling off for the younger people. And now you got Uber and Lyft and all these new ideas. But it's not about being anti-car with these young people. And think about everything you just learned about millennials. It's about being local and environmentally conscious and socially aware. So when it comes to place, and we've done a lot of research on this, and I'm going to share with you an eye chart, but when we ask millennials across America, what do they want in a location? And so think about your young people that you've had in high school here. What do they want to come back to? What do they want? Yeah, they want the basics. They want a job, and they want a variety of employment opportunities. They want affordable housing. They want it to be safe. But there are all these place-making attributes they want. They want their community to embrace creativity, embrace innovation, be bikeable, walkable, have easy public transportation, be diverse, have this urban living environment, read activity center. So that's what they want. And they believe that transportation is an important part of that. In fact, some of the millennials are saying to us, we think that ultimately there are going to be some places, and it doesn't have to be a downtown, but it's just going to be that high-density area where we're not going to even have to have a car because we can use Uber. The car doesn't define us. What defines us is our connectivity to everybody, and we can do that now empowered. So as you think about your long-term plan, more walking paths, more biking paths, higher density areas. Don't take away what I just drove through, which is beautiful, coming up the southern part of your county, but there got to be pockets of density that make a lot of sense. And here out in Portland is even skateboard routes. So millennials, just like those aging boomers, want the same thing. They're thinking about a car-light life, a 15-minute community. And so when we think about all of that, and we put it all together, and we don't know a lot about you, but we have a few ideas for you. And the first one is, in order to accomplish great things, you got to think really big. And so a lot of communities have what I call SAW goals, safe and wimpy, right? And what we say to our clients is, you need to have a BHAG. And this comes from Jim Collins, Good to Great, which is a really famous business book. And he talks about big, hairy, audacious goals. And that's what we would help. Because you know what? You're not going to accomplish great things unless you really stretch. And you might not reach that goal, but you're going to accomplish a lot more by stretching. The second thing is to become a generationally savvy planner. So everything you've learned here, and you're going to get a copy of this deck, you learn about this generational lens as another lens to plan. Not the only one, but know where your future customers are going, your aging boomers and your aging millennials. Where are they going? Because that generation right behind millennials is going to look more like millennials, and they're going to look like the silent generation, right? Standard demographics supporting the future planning is really being replaced by this sort of generational perspective. And time is really of the essence. 28% of our workforce today is millennial, and 44% will be millennial by 2025 in 10 years. Encourage millennial community builders. The old way is you get input based on planners' needs. The new way is you get input based on stakeholder terms. So millennials, at VCU right now, Virginia Commonwealth University, 51% of the students that go there freshman year say they're going to start a business. It's the Steve Jobs effect. Everybody, they're just wired to be this creator. Think back on what you just saw with that video and those defining events. And they want to change the world and make it for the better. My idea about that being more socialistic. So they're social entrepreneurs. So, boy, doing planning and thinking about your future, you got to involve them. Last night, we're helping Rockbridge County with a 2020 visioning plan, and we met just with young people last night, a whole room of them saying, what do you think about this plan? What do you think about this economic development idea? And, we weren't expecting great things from them, but what we were expecting is a certain amount of buy-in and participation, because the whole plan's about them. It's about where we're trying to go. And so listening to them and their feedback was just wonderful. Number 4, continue to embrace multimodal planning. And just about every long-term range plan, you think first it's car-centric planning, but now you've got to think people-centric. And so I know the tide isn't going to come all the way out here. And so don't think that way. And I know you're not going to have the density for bus service. Maybe connectivity bus service, connecting activity centers, but just think about those high-density areas and having most incredible bike trails that you could have. It would be really remarkable. It would really set you guys apart. So more and more bike trails. And the last point is you got to think about workforce housing. And I'm not talking about the lowest cost housing just to cater to every socioeconomic group. I'm talking about affordable housing for your workers and having a sense of mixed use housing. The old way in every community was development centric. Developers came up with the idea and everybody would sort of kowtow to that and said, okay, let's try to make it work because this guy's going to risk something and put some money up. The future is about being community centric, and people are going to be voting in the future with smartphones. So you gotta be really prescriptive and very intentional. So Portland is a really hot spot now. And one way that they did it is they created the rule of 1/3. And I'm not saying for you guys to become Portland. In fact, don't become Portland. Okay, just hear me out. But I want to tell you how prescriptive Portland was. They said anything inside the city here, we're going to say if you have a building that's over 3 stories or worth more than $500,000, it has to be 1/3 retail, 1/3 commercial, and 1/3 residential. And we're going to have free bus service all around the downtown area. So it's a mecca for kids because they don't have to have cars. They can just get to work, live right above a store, all that, all within 15 minutes. And I'm being passionate here because I want you to understand, I'm not saying become Portland, but these concepts other cities are going to start embracing, and you're going to start to see more and more attraction for millennials to these sort of millennial hubs. And that leaves me with my last point, why you have to do this now. The next 10 years are going to establish hubs. So I grew up in Richmond. I love Richmond. We call it RVA now. And ever since I got, my degree and started working, I noticed that we had this incredible competition with Charlotte, right? And we were going neck and neck. Who's going to get Piedmont Airlines as the hub? And Charlotte won, right? And now, that made a big difference. And it became US Air, and it really changed the directory of Charlotte. Charlotte became a hub. And then our banking centers, right? We had a bunch of banks. They had a bunch of banks, but their banks got a little bigger and bought air banks. And so our financial industry got kind of sucked away to Charlotte. So I've had to grow up at Richmond in the shadow of Charlotte all these years. And I'm so excited now because when we do the interviews of millennials in Charlotte, they're not excited about Charlotte. Charlotte's too corporate. And our millennials in Richmond love Richmond. It is the hot spot, right? And so I am so excited because we're going to finally, I won't say it a little expletive, but we're going to finally beat Charlotte, right? And so, but my point is Charlotte became a hub. And if you can become a hub, and even a unique hub in this more rural community, if you can figure out this formula and have these pockets and attract young people and get them to come back after college as you've graduated in high school, you're going to be a special place, and they're going to tell other people, and it's the law of attraction. Just why Asheville is leading the way, they've got more people on that end of that creative continuum, in Nashville too, saying, come here, this is a special place. And so you'll get your fair share of young people. You'll get your fair share of creative people. And that's going to be what's going to write the story of this community in 20 to 30 years. And the decisions you make tonight really are going to impact the long-term future. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I apologize for my passion, but I just get to study this and go see it in person all over the country. And I want Virginia to be hot for the next 400 years, and I want communities like yours to thrive. So thank you for being great listeners. And now I'll open it up to any questions you may have.
What's the word for Gen X?
What's the word?
For Gen X.
There's no extra word for it, but those are the guys that actually get it done.
No, I mean, you gave us the 3 words. What's the 4th word?
Selfless. They are, the word for Gen X is self, inspired. These are the guys that actually get it done on budget, on time. If you think about Gen X, remember that term latchkey kids? You've all heard that term? So Gen Xers grew at a time when boomer parents, and they were two in the workforce, and parents were coming home and talking about the man and how bad, and layoffs and working 60 hours a week. And so the Gen Xers were letting themselves home from school, letting themselves in, making the sandwiches, doing the homework, and then looking at their parents saying, well, you know, what about me? And so we look at Gen Xers as really the folks that are you know, can handle everything themselves. And so if you think about Gen Xers in the workforce, these are the guys that get it done on time and on budget, and they don't want to have meetings. I mean, meetings are like a waste of time. Let me get back to my task, you know? That's what they are. So self-efficient, self-inspired. Those guys get it done on time and on budget. Thank God we have them.
Okay. How do you build what I call synergy? I'm familiar with Denver. I'm familiar with Portland, Washington, D.C., Alexandria.
Right.
And I knew back in the 60s, a lot of these places, they had their share of slums, vacant buildings,
Right.
and whatever. And I see where the millennials are coming from, and I understand that. Somewhere along the line, there has to be a tipping point where you bring
Yes.
businesses in and you bring young people in, and that builds synergy. How do you do that?
Yeah, and that's the million-dollar question, you know, and it's the chicken and egg question too, you know. Do you really just put all your effort on place and then you attract these people, but there are not any jobs and so forth? So I wish I had the magic answer on that. I think you got to do both. I think, you know, there's some counties in Virginia that I think have done exceedingly well, that are rural counties that just do the blocking and tackling and hire the right people and are very aggressive in certain categories with economic development. And so my message is, don't stop that. But you at the same time need to also be investing in place. And so another message is, there's some parts of this county that are beautiful, and so you just got to be really deliberate and say, those parts are going to be rural and these parts are going to be really high density, because if we don't create that experiment, if we don't create that place that alchemy can happen, then we're not going to have a chance in the future. So I just want y'all to understand where I'm coming from. I just think that you got to have those activity centers, those high density areas. I don't know a lot about your plan, but I think the conceptual idea is few high density areas and then rural areas. And then you've got to invest in that at the same time that you're investing in a smart economic development, blocking and tackling, going after companies. Got to do both.
To build on Commissioner Taylor's point, you travel to Blacksburg or Charlottesville or Harrisonburg, and you see all of this fever, and right at the core of it is higher education.
Yes.
Now, how significant is that to get the synergy she's talking about as a building block?
Yeah.
How important is that where we're here, a rural area, and we really don't have that nearby? It's across the river. We've got a community college and that, but we don't have that synergy for the educational thing that brings them here, keeps them here.
Yeah. The good news is the traditional kind of education system, higher education system, is becoming disintermediated by technology. So, but having watching where education goes and having base camps here, you know, investing in the community college, creating entrepreneurial labs in areas that can be supported by a lot of your aging boomers who are retired that still want to be plugged back in with some business sense to teach younger people, and really trying to get known as a community that really welcomes small business. And, you know, one advantage you have about growing older is it's boomers who are going to make us older, right? And a lot of the boomers that we study, and we've written a book about this, they really do see themselves starting new businesses. So how do you support that drive that they have and be known for that, but at the same time also be great mentors for young people? So in those high density areas, teaming up with people that in organizations that can invest in incubators or, you know, startup factories or whatever you call them, they're the rage, I think is really important. And I think it's important to look at some small towns that, you know, I'm not suggesting you model yourself off of Denver, but I mean, go to Asheville, North Carolina. They really have gotten some recent energy there. And look at Stanton's, another town that has done a pretty good job. Even Waynesboro is starting to get a little bit of a hipness and groove to it. And then watch what's happening in Lexington. I mean, Rockbridge County has come together with Buena Vista and Lexington, the city of Lexington. All three of them are creating something called Rockbridge 2020. That's what we're helping them with. And trying to involve the young people and trying to showcase what that community is all about and the spirit that a small community can do. What a small community, you guys have some real magic here. And I don't think you have a monopoly on it, but to get business done here, you guys know each other in this community, right? It's a small enough community where everybody tries to help everybody. So that's something you can tap into. That's something that you can use when you are telling your economic development story. And I just encourage you to try to figure out how to package that for companies.
How do you account for the high mobility of the younger workforce? That they don't tend to stay with one particular company longer than 5 years.
I know.
And they think of nothing to switch.
They don't.
careers.
They don't look at a company as a career. In fact, they don't even look at themselves as having a career, right? They're looking out. You know, I told you that boomers live to work. Work defines us. It's a big part of who we are, right? The younger generations and a little Gen Xers really started this, and now millennials are really driving it. They work in order to live. So they just want to work 38.5 hours or whatever it is, and then that's it. I've done the job. Now, it may be that they're doing some of it at night and some of the day, and they can, you know, feel like the technology allows them to do that. But they're not looking at their employer as the greatest thing from heaven or even their job, right? What they're more about is a lifestyle. They're more about a lifestyle. And they have had, especially the ones in the workforce now, they've grown up when our government has been the largest it's ever been, right? And so they see the government in their lives. And a lot of the elected officials now are starting to realize this. We just spoke at the governor's, National Governors Conference last year. And we were sharing these generational insights that if you ask millennials, do they want a larger government or smaller in their government services, you know, great, the answer is yes. They see government being in their lives. If you ask boomers the same questions, it's no. Government's good for wars and roads, right? We don't want more taxes and bigger government. And so millennials have this unfortunate consequence of this great recession, right? And it's really hurt them. And they also have another thing, and I'm not going to be editorial on this, but they're more highly educated, the most highly educated group ever, but consequently they have this debt. So $23,000 in debt. So here's this young millennial, and the unemployment rate is so much higher for them. And the wages over the last 7-10 years haven't gone up, the household income. And so, and us boomers who live to work that are reaching 65 are saying, well, I think I kind of want to keep my job, right? And so we're not making room for them at the pace that economists thought we would. And so when you put all of this into the soup, what it means is it's a lot harder for young people to get a job. And I want to also add in that we're now competing globally like crazy. It is a flat world. And so as boomers, we didn't have this competition. Those other systems failed, but they kept people down and kept the entrepreneurial energy out of them. And so now, consequently, it's a global market. And so we're not seeing the millennials get traction like us boomers did and Xers did. And so if you look at the wealth that traditionally older generations have to younger generations, it's always been a tenfold difference because it takes a while to start saving, but you do. Now the difference is 47 times, right? It's just phenomenal what has happened. And so I think in part a lot of the millennials are saying, well, you know, I'm not, I'm not going to keep score the way my parents kept score. I'm not going to have 3 cars in this big house. I'm going to share more of my assets. I'm going to share things. I'm going to, what's more important to me is being that hyper-connected person, that collective self. And that's the implication it has on community.
Bring this a little closer to home. One of the things that we see is our tremendously diverse population in the county. Unfortunately, demographics and geology breaks us up into areas. People come in to be farmers. They raise a family, then that next family comes along and works. They own the farm, and now we want to have something better for my kids, so I'm going to send them to college. That's about the last you're going to see them down on the farm.
Right.
It's a general thing. High schoolers, that last day, for the most part, they find a way to go on somewhere else. The roads through Isle2040 County must be some good roads because the traffic that goes through us, going to the shipyards, going to NASA, going to Langley, and on and on and on. There's all kinds of work out there. But most of us are from the generation that you found one of those good jobs and you stayed with the man.
Right.
And you didn't leave unless there was something really dynamic there to throw you away. Workforce, we found out doing for necessary or find some workforce housing. We found out that people came here and worked and went home in another jurisdiction. They didn't live here because we don't have, well, I guess, what they're used to having.
Right.
And they're not particularly interested in turning around and getting something fancy just so they can buy here. And I guess one of the things we have to find a unique way to look at our personal demographics throughout the county is we do have people in every one of those generations in this small county.
Yeah.
And when you start saying or suggesting that we change how we are going to use the land, that's where the issues start coming in. Because we're comfortable, we're used to, we made a living, our families made livings, they went to school, and that worked out for us. So now we find we, as a county, have to do things differently or we're not going to survive.
Yeah.
So we work on several levels, I think, trying to get educational facilities here, train people here, have them work here, and that's a really big step for us, or anybody,
Right.
or any municipality to do.
And I wish I could come here tonight with a silver bullet and said, if you just shoot this,
Would
it'll work.
expect that.
But I tell you, you're right, and so part of what has to happen, because change is difficult, is that the kind of information I have here, and this is just one lens, but this idea that you got to educate people and have a lot of forums and really have people understand that change is inevitable, and then to help hopefully bring best practices and models here and find a plan that everybody can get around. Because, I mean, the plan that you have looks pretty good to me, but y'all are going to end up changing it as you go. I mean, it's a plan, right? But you got to do this big, hairy, audacious goal. You got to say, gosh, if we are on the same trajectory, what's going to happen? We're going to be a bedroom community, and we're going to be old, and we're going to have everybody screaming for more services, and our tax rate's going to have to flip completely and be one of the highest and not one of the lowest. So I think that it's in part a large education effort too, for people to understand if they care about this area, they gotta be informed about what's happening and where we're headed. They don't have to buy into it completely, but only if you're informed can you really have a substantive debate about what the options are. So I know that's painful sometimes, but I think that education is really important.
One other question, Mr. Martin. I wonder if in your research, whether or not you uncovered any data regarding what Generation Yers,
Millennials.
what the Generation Y would think 35 to 40 years from now?
Right.
And how will that impact? I mean, because we're looking at this plan that we have, 2040.
Right.
2040, I'll be 79 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you talked about
You'll
being
be as old as I am now.
And so I'm wondering if there's any research out there in terms of whether or not those Generation Y individuals will perhaps change their thought processes.
Let me put it into context, because nobody has that crystal ball, right? And it's a wonderful question. When you look into the future, you just try to see what are those dots that you can connect that seem to be sort of the gestalt of where things are moving, right? And so that's how we're anticipating it. Like Wayne Gretzky, the great one in hockey, he said, "God, how did you be the all-time scorer?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. I guess I skated to where I thought the puck was going to be." So that's your question. Where's that puck going to be?
Right.
And so we have this generational lens, and we're not the only people with it, but that's where we think millennials have this greater sense of being together and less sense of sort of keeping score with the materialistic things, and they're headed down this path. And it's going to be interesting to see when they have kids and the school systems and all that, what happens to them. But that's where we think we're seeing the future, and that's how. If you just stay on them and have this focus and have your plan, you're going to be able to do a better job looking now for what millennials are thinking and what they're doing. It's going to be an easier way for you guys who aren't planners to be planners, right? Because you're lay planners, sort of. But it's going to be an easy way for you to guys say, well, how are millennials? Like I would say to you, what is the percentage of the kids that graduate? How many kids graduate from high school every year in this county? And then what's the population age 24? Like, that's a statistic y'all should know by heart. And what does that have over the last 10 years? What's happening there, right? So that's a millennial perspective and understanding the stickiness of your county. And then how many millennials are buying larger homes? Or, what kind are they buying? And you're now, I'll guarantee it, you're going to start looking at articles that you see millennials in the headline, and you're going to start reading them, and you're going to go, oh my gosh, millennials, they're buying smaller homes. Oh my gosh. So, but I think that there's another really good thing going on that's to your advantage, that millennials really care about where, the source of food. They really care about their locality. They really want to get engaged. They want to get involved. And so we've got to figure out how to tap into that. You guys have farms here. You guys, it might be more community gardens going to be making sense as they get older. And so just understanding where they're headed is where you need to head to intercept them. And you got some millennial experts that live here, right? You guys have some people here.
But, and as we look at the demographics of the people on the boards and the Planning Commission, and even if you just take a look at the people who tend to attend the Planning Commission meetings, you don't see those people.
Right. And that's what I tell politicians about this. They're running the wrong, it's all about the man and the party, and it's not about the issue. If you make the campaign about the issue and you get them involved, I want to tell you a quick story that I learned a lot about yesterday. In Lexington, there's this wonderful outdoor theater called Lime Kiln. And it's really in the middle of boulders and everything. It's not very far out of town. But about 20, 30 years ago, the community invested there, and they put stages up, and they have plays and concerts, and it was really an outdoor theater. And then for some reason, that lost its way, and it kind of went out of business, and for 2 years, it's just been doing nothing. Well, the millennials in Lexington got together and reopened that thing, and they had the most fabulous first season ever. Every concert, every event, 600 people sold out. And so it's just been a remarkable turnaround. And it's because they wanted to take it on and make it theirs and do that. And so you got to find those millennial leaders and be a little more intentional and saying, we've got this challenge. Here's an area that we think could be a really high-density area, and it could be kind of a hamlet that we could almost have it self-sustaining, and we want your input on this. So then go to them. Don't wait for them to come to this room and feel like they're talking to the man. but take your plan to them and really focus on how do we make this something special? How do we get their input on their terms? That's why I'm saying we're moving from a developer-centric world to more of that engaged participant world.
Does anybody else have any questions? You've given us a lot to think about.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed this.
And really engaging. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.